Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop touching the merchandise. The words didn't come out quietly, and they weren't meant to. They cut across the polished air of the store like a blade, sharp enough to turn heads from every corner of the showroom. Conversations paused. A woman near the accessories wall lowered her phone. A man browsing jackets froze mid-reach. And right in the center of it all stood Malik Jefferson, still, composed, his hand resting lightly on the sleeve of a tailored charcoal coat he hadn't even lifted from the rack. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malik Jefferson. He didn't flinch, not at the voice, not at the sudden silence that followed, and not at the weight of eyes now pressing against him from every direction. He had heard that tone before. Not the exact words, maybe, but the message underneath them. The quiet assumption, the immediate suspicion, the decision already made before a single fact was checked. The store itself was pristine, the kind of place where everything gleamed under soft white lighting, where each display was spaced just far enough apart to suggest exclusivity, not accessibility. Glass shelves, matte black fixtures, minimalist design that whispered luxury without ever needing to say it out loud. It was a flagship location, right in the heart of downtown, where rent ran north of $20,000 a month and foot traffic meant influence. Malik knew every inch of it. He had approved the layout, signed off on the lighting, chosen the exact placement of that very rack. But none of that showed on him today. He wore a plain black t-shirt, slightly fitted, paired with dark jeans and clean sneakers that didn't carry a visible logo. No watch, no utility, no outward signal of the kind of authority that usually walked into rooms like this and got greeted before it spoke. That was intentional. It always was. The clerk stepped closer now, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, each step measure controlled, like she was closing in on something she had already decided didn't belong. We've had issues with people handling items they don't intend to purchase, she added, her voice lower this time, but somehow sharper, aimed directly at him like a spotlight, tightening its focus. Malik slowly turned his head, meeting her gaze. Calm, unbothered. The kind of calm that didn't come from comfort, but from experience. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. A subtle tightening. A tension that hung just beneath the surface, waiting. 2 steps behind the clerk, a security guard adjusted his stance, pretending to look elsewhere, but clearly listening. Near the entrance, another employee glanced over, then quickly looked down, as if avoiding being pulled into something she already sensed was going in the wrong direction. Malik didn't move his hand from the coat. He didn't step back. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, grounded, as if the floor beneath him belonged to him in a way no one else in that room could understand. The clerk folded her arms lightly, her posture shifting from polite inquiry to quiet authority. I'm going to need you to step away from the display, she said, a little louder now. Just enough for the nearest customers to hear. And they did. Heads turned again. A whisper passed between 2 people near the register. Someone lifted a phone, not fully recording yet, but ready. Malik exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. There was no anger in it, no rush to respond, just a steady breath, like he was measuring something deeper than the moment itself. Because moments like this, they weren't new. Not to him. Not to someone who had spent years building something from nothing, only to still be questioned the second he stepped outside the image people expected him to fit. The clerk took one more step forward, close enough now that the distance between them felt intentional. Controlled. Sir, she said again, this time with a firmness that tried to mask uncertainty, I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you can't follow store policy. The word policy lingered in the air like a shield. A justification. A way to make something personal sound procedural. Malik finally lifted his hand from the coat, letting the fabric fall back into place without a wrinkle. His eyes moved briefly across the store, taking it all in. The lighting, the layout, the people, the tension that had quietly built itself around him like a stage being set. Then he looked back at her. Still calm, still steady, still exactly where he intended to be. The silence did not break immediately. It stretched, thin and tight, like a wire pulled just before it snaps. And in that space, Malik Jefferson simply stood there, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable, as if the weight of the moment did not belong to him but to everyone else in the room. The clerk shifted her stance slightly, expecting resistance, expecting denial, maybe even an apology, but none came. Instead, Malik glanced once more at the coat he had just released, smoothing an invisible crease with the back of his fingers before letting his hand fall to his side. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it carried a kind of quiet ownership that did not match the way he was being addressed. The clerk noticed it, even if she could not explain why it unsettled her. "Sir, I am serious," she said, her voice tightening. "We cannot have you handling items without intent to purchase." The words were careful, chosen, but the meaning behind them was not. It was clear, direct, and already judged. A few feet away, the security guard took a slow step closer. Not enough to intervene, just enough to be seen, to be felt, a presence rather than a force. Malik's eyes flicked briefly in his direction, then back to the clerk, still calm, still steady, as if he was watching something play out that he'd seen too many times before to be surprised by. Near the front of the store, a young sales associate, barely out of her 20s, shifted uneasily behind the counter. Her name tag read Chloe, and she had been watching from the moment the clerk first spoke. Something about the situation did not sit right with her. She had seen customers mishandle items before, people who laughed too loudly, who ignored price tags, who treated the store like a showroom instead of a brand. But this felt different, quieter, more deliberate. She glanced at the clerk, then back at Malik, her brow furrowing slightly, as if trying to place a memory she could not quite reach. The clerk took another step forward, closing the space completely now. "I'm going to need you to leave," she said, no longer framing it as a request. The word need landed heavier than before, drawing more attention. A man near the fitting rooms leaned slightly to get a better view. A woman by the accessories table whispered something under her breath, and the low hum of the store shifted into something sharper, more focused. Malik let the silence sit for a moment longer, not as hesitation, but as control. Then he spoke, his voice even, measured, carrying just enough to be heard without rising. "Is that your final decision?" he asked. The question was simple, but it did not sound like one. It sounded like a line being drawn. The clerk blinked, just once, caught off guard by the tone more than the words. "Yes," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. "It is." Malik nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if confirming something to himself rather than to her. And in that small motion, something shifted again, subtle but undeniable, the kind of shift that made people straighten their posture without knowing why. Chloe felt it first, her fingers tightening slightly around the tablet she held. There was something about the way he had asked that question, not defensive, not emotional, just certain, like someone who already knew how this would end. The clerk, however, pressed forward, mistaking calm for compliance. "Security will escort you out if necessary," she added, her voice carrying now, firm, practiced. The guard took another step, closer this time, his presence no longer subtle. Malik did not look at him, did not acknowledge the movement at all. Instead, his gaze moved slowly across the store once more, taking in the customers, the employees, the layout, every detail exactly as it had been designed. His design, though no one in that moment could see it. He paused briefly near the front display, where a large digital screen looped a campaign video, models moving in slow motion, wearing the very pieces that hung around him, the brand name glowing softly in the corner, a name that meant status, identity, recognition. Malik's eyes lingered on it for just a second longer than necessary. Then he reached into his pocket. The movement was unhurried, controlled, drawing just enough attention to shift the focus of the room once again. The clerk watched closely now, suspicion sharpening into certainty in her mind. "If you're trying to call someone, it will not change the situation," she said, her voice edged with impatience. Malik did not respond immediately. He pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, then lifted it to his ear with a calm that felt almost deliberate in its contrast to the tension around him. "I need the regional director," he said, his voice low but clear now. There was a pause on the other end, inaudible to everyone else, but whatever was said did not change his expression. He simply added, "Tell them it is Malik," and ended the call. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second, unnoticed by most, misunderstood by others, but Chloe felt it. Land differently. Her eyes widened slightly as something clicked into place, a memory from a training video, a company meeting, a name spoken with a different tone, a different weight. She looked at him again, really looked this time, and the pieces began to align, the posture, the calm, the way he had not once reacted the way someone in his position was expected to. The clerk, however, only frowned, misreading the moment entirely. "This is not going to help you," she said, her confidence returning. "You should have just left when I asked." Malik lowered his phone slowly, his gaze returning to her, steady, unshaken. And for the first time, there was something else there, not anger, not frustration, but a quiet finality, like a door closing somewhere far beyond the room. "No," he said, just one word, calm, controlled, absolute. "You should not have asked at all." The words did not echo, but they landed heavy and precise. And for a brief moment, no one in the store seemed to breathe. The clerk's expression flickered just slightly, like something inside her had shifted, but she refused to acknowledge it. She straightened her posture, tightening her grip on the situation the only way she knew how, through authority, through repetition, through control. "Security," she said, without looking away from Malik. Her voice sharper now, more performative. The guard stepped forward immediately this time, closing the distance with a measured confidence that came from routine, not certainty. He positioned himself just to Malik's side, not touching, not aggressive, but unmistakably present. "Sir, I will need you to come with me," he said, his tone neutral, trained, the kind of voice that tried to make removal sound like procedure instead of judgment. Malik did not move, not even an inch. His gaze remained forward, his posture unchanged, as if the request had not altered the reality he stood in. Around them, the energy tightened further. Customers shifted their weight, some stepping back slightly, others leaning in, drawn by the tension that now filled the air like static before a storm. Chloe felt in her chest, a growing unease that refused to settle. She glanced again at Malik, then at the clerk, then at the security guard. Something about the sequence of events felt wrong, not in policy, but in principle. She took a small step forward from behind the counter, hesitant at first, then a little more certain. "Maybe we should just check the system," she said, her voice softer, careful, but clear enough to cut through the silence. The clerk turned her head sharply. The look she gave Chloe was quick but firm, a warning more than a response. "It has already been handled," she replied, dismissing the suggestion without pause. But Chloe did not step back this time. Her eyes flicked once more to Malik, studying him with a new awareness. The name echoed in her mind now. Malik, she had heard it before, not casually, not in passing, but in a context that carried weight. Orientation week, corporate training, a video that played on a large screen where executives spoke about vision, growth, identity. She remembered sitting in a chair near the back, half-focused, until a man appeared on screen, calm, direct, speaking about the brand, not as a business, but as something built, something intentional, something personal. She had not expected to see that same presence standing in front of her now, dressed simply, saying almost nothing, and yet controlling everything about the moment. Her grip tightened on the tablet again, this time not from uncertainty, but from realization. The security guard cleared his throat slightly, attempting to re-establish direction. "Sir," he said again, a little firmer, "I did not want to escalate this, but we do need you to step outside." Malik finally turned his head, slowly, meeting the guard's eyes for the first time. There was no resistance in his expression, no hostility, just a calm that felt heavier than anything else in the room. "You already escalated it," he said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried, reaching further than volume ever could. The guard hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, enough for the room to notice. The clerk stepped in again, trying to regain control of the narrative. "We are following policy," she insisted, her voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in urgency, as if saying it enough times would make it true beyond question. Malik's eyes shifted back to her, steady, unwavering. "No," he said, just as calmly as before. "You are following assumption." The distinction hung in the air, clear, undeniable, and suddenly harder to ignore. A man near the entrance lowered his phone slightly, his expression changing from curiosity to something more thoughtful. A woman by the display table crossed her arms, watching more closely now, not just observing, but evaluating. The atmosphere had begun to turn, slowly, subtly, like a tide shifting direction without announcing itself. Chloe took another step forward, this time standing just a little closer to the edge of the situation, her voice steadier now. "I think we should verify before asking him to leave," she said more firmly. The clerk's patience snapped, not outwardly, but in the tightening of her jaw, the narrowing of her eyes. "That is not your call," she replied sharply, but the certainty in her tone had weakened, just slightly. Malik watched the exchange without interruption, without urgency, as if time itself had slowed around him. His phone remained in his hand, not as a tool, but as a signal, something already set in motion, something that did not require further action from him. The store, once calm and curated, now felt different, not chaotic, not loud, but charged, like every detail had been pulled into sharper focus. Every movement, every word, every glance carrying more weight than before, and in the center of it all stood Malik Jefferson, exactly where he had been from the beginning, unmoved, unshaken, and no longer just a man in a black shirt inside a luxury store, but something else entirely, something the room had not recognized yet, but was beginning to feel even before it fully understood. The shift did not happen all at once. It moved through the store slowly, like a ripple that started at the center and worked its way outward, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Chloe stood there now, no longer behind the counter, no longer just observing, her eyes fixed on Malik with a certainty that had not been there before. "I know that name," she said, not loudly, but clearly enough for the people closest to hear. The clerk turned toward her again, irritation flashing across her face. "Chloe, step back," she snapped, but Chloe did not move this time. Her voice steadied, stronger now. "No, I mean, I've seen him before," she continued, her mind racing through fragments of memory, training sessions, internal videos, company announcements. The kind of information most employees forgot the moment the screen went dark, but not her. "Not this time. He was in the leadership video," she added, her words landing with more weight than she expected. The security guard glanced between them, his stance loosening just slightly, uncertainty creeping into a posture that had been trained to remain firm. The clerk let out a short breath, dismissive. "We have a lot of people in videos," she replied quickly, too quickly, as if cutting the thought off before it could take shape. But Chloe shook her head, her eyes never leaving Malik. "Not like that," she said quietly. The distinction hung there, subtle but sharp. A customer near the entrance shifted closer, curiosity turning into attention. Another lifted their phone a little higher now, not hiding it anymore. The store was no longer just watching. It was listening. The guard cleared his throat again, but this time the authority in his voice had softened. "Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding, we can resolve it at the front," he offered. The change in tone did not go unnoticed, not by the clerk, not by Malik. Malik did not respond immediately. His gaze moved briefly to Chloe, acknowledging her presence, her shift, her willingness to step into something most people avoided, then back to the clerk, who now seemed to be holding on to control with less certainty than before. "There is no misunderstanding," Malik said calmly, his voice steady, each word measured. "There's only what you assumed and what you chose to do with it." The sentence settled into the room, heavier than anything spoken so far. The clerk's expression tightened, the edges of her confidence beginning to crack, even if she refused to show it fully. "We're trying to protect the store," she insisted, her voice rising slightly again, but now it carried a defensive edge rather than authority. Malik nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "From what?" he asked, the question simple, direct, but it did not invite an easy answer. The clerk hesitated, just for a moment, long enough for the silence to stretch, long enough for others to notice. Chloe stepped forward another inch, her voice lower now, almost to herself, but still audible. "From him," she said, then immediately shook her head, correcting herself. "Or from what you thought he was." That distinction shifted something again. The the kind of shift that could not be undone once spoken. The security guard looked down briefly, then back up, his stance no longer as rigid. The certainty that had brought him forward now replaced with something else, something closer to doubt. A man near the display table spoke under his breath. Not to anyone in particular, he has not done anything. And that was true. Malik had not raised his voice, had not argued, had not resisted. He had simply stood there, and yet the entire room had moved around him as if he had forced it to. The clerk felt it now. The room slipping from her control, the narrative she had set beginning to unravel. "This is not about that," she said quickly, trying to pull it back. "This is about policy." But the word no longer carried the same weight. It sounded thinner now, less certain. Malik's eyes held hers, calm, unwavering. "Policy does not follow people," he said quietly. "People apply it." The line landed clean, precise. And for the first time the room did not just feel tense. It felt aware of what had been said, of what had been done, of what was unfolding in front of them. Chloe's grip on the tablet loosened slightly. Not from uncertainty, but from clarity. She knew now, without question, who he was, not just a name from a screen, but the presence in front of her, the one who had built something that everyone in that room was standing inside of. The clerk opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. The pause stretched, longer this time, heavier, and in that pause, something else entered the space. Not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of the front door opening. A subtle shift in air, a new presence stepping in, unnoticed at first by most, but not by Malik. His eyes moved briefly toward the entrance, then back, as if confirming something had arrived right on time. The clerk followed his glance instinctively, her posture tightening again, but this time it was not control she was trying to hold on to. It was ground she felt slipping beneath her. And for the first time since this began, she was no longer the one directing the moment. She was reacting to it. The door did not slam. It did not need to. The quiet click as it closed carried enough weight to draw attention from those closest to the entrance. A man stepped inside. Mid-40s, tailored suit, posture straight, the kind of presence that belonged in rooms where decisions were made. Not questioned, he scanned the floor once, quickly, then again more carefully, his eyes locking on Malik with immediate recognition. There was no hesitation in his stride as he moved forward, cutting through the space with purpose. Customers instinctively shifted aside, not because they knew who he was, but because they could feel that he did. The clerk noticed him too, her expression tightening as she tried to assess the situation before it assessed her. "Can I help you?" she began, stepping slightly in his path. But he did not stop, not immediately. His focus remained on Malik until he was close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Sir," he said, the word landing differently this time, not as a challenge, not as a dismissal, but as recognition, clear and direct. The shift was immediate, visible. The guard straightened. The clerk's posture faltered for just a second, and Chloe felt it like confirmation snapping into place. Malik turned his head slightly, acknowledging him with a calm nod. Nothing more, as if this arrival had always been part of the moment. As if everything leading up to this had been allowed to unfold for a reason. "We have a situation here," the clerk interjected, quickly, trying to regain control, her voice moving faster now, filling the space before it could be taken from her. "This individual refused to comply with store policy and stop," the man said, not loudly, but firmly enough to cut through her sentence like it had never existed. She froze, mid-word, the interruption landing harder than volume ever could. He turned to her then, fully, his expression measured but no longer neutral. "What exactly is the situation?" he asked, each word deliberate, not rushed, not emotional, just precise, the kind of precision that left little room for error. The clerk swallowed slightly, her confidence now forced, reconstructed in real time. He was handling merchandise without intent to purchase and refused to leave when asked, she said, the explanation practiced, structured, but thinner now, less convincing even as she spoke it. The man listened without interruption, his gaze steady, then shifted back to Malik. Just for a moment, as if confirming something beyond the words. "Malik," met his eyes briefly, then said nothing, his silence carrying more authority than anything else in the room. The man nodded once, subtle, then looked back at the clerk. "Did you verify his identity?" he asked, the question simple, but it landed like a test already graded. The clerk hesitated just a fraction too long. "That was not necessary," she replied, the answer immediate but not solid. The kind of response built on assumption rather than fact. Chloe's breath caught slightly. She could feel the direction changing now. Not slowly anymore, but decisively. The man's expression shifted, not dramatically, just enough to show that something had been confirmed, not by evidence, but by absence of it. "Not necessary," he repeated, quieter this time, as if examining the phrase itself. Then he took a step back, just enough to widen the space, to allow the room to see the full picture. "You made a removal decision without verification," he continued, his tone still controlled, but now carrying weight. The clerk opened her mouth, searching for ground that was no longer there. "We were following protocol," she insisted again, but the words sounded hollow now, almost disconnected from the reality around it. The man's gaze did not waver. "Protocol begins with verification," he said, the correction clean, direct, leaving no room for interpretation. The security guard shifted slightly, his stance no longer aligned with the clerk, his presence now uncertain, caught between instruction and unfolding truth. A customer near the display whispered something to another, not quietly enough to go unheard. This is not going how she thought. And it was not. The store itself felt different now. Not just tense, but exposed, like something hidden had been pulled into the light without warning. Malik remained exactly where he had been, still composed, his phone now resting loosely in his hand. No longer needed to direct anything, because everything had already been set in motion. The clerk looked from the man to Malik and back again, her controls slipping in small, visible cracks. "Who is he?" she asked finally, the question coming out sharper than intended, edged with frustration, edged with something else she had not yet named. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward Malik, a silent acknowledgement, a permission that did not need words. The kind of exchange that spoke louder than any introduction could, and in that moment the room leaned in, not physically, but collectively, waiting, sensing that whatever came next would not just explain the situation, it would redefine it. Malik lifted his gaze, steady, calm, and for the first time there was something else behind it. Not anger, not vindication, but a quiet certainty that the moment had arrived exactly when it was supposed to, the kind of certainty that does not rush, does not react. It simply reveals itself when everything else has already been exposed. The air in the store no longer felt controlled. It felt suspended. Like everything inside, it was waiting for a single sentence to land and decide what came next. The man in the suit did not rush to speak. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of the question to settle. Then he turned slightly toward the clerk again, his expression no longer neutral, but not emotional either. Something more deliberate, more final. "You asked who he is," he said, his voice steady, carrying across the polished floor without needing to rise. The clerk nodded, almost reflexively, her posture tightening as if bracing for an answer she was not sure she wanted to hear. Chloe stood frozen now, her earlier certainty solidifying into something deeper, something undeniable. Malik did not move, did not shift, did not attempt to fill the space. He simply stood there, as if the answer did not need him to announce it, because it already existed in everything around them, the lighting, the layout, the brand itself. "This is Malik Jefferson," the man continued, pausing just enough for the name to settle, to connect, to land where it needed to, founder and chief executive officer of this company. The words did not echo, but they moved through the room like a current, immediate and irreversible. The clerk's face changed, not dramatically, but enough, the kind of change that comes when certainty collapses under truth. Her lips parted slightly, but no words followed. The security guard stepped back, not instructed, not commanded, just instinctively, as if the ground he had been standing on no longer belonged to the version of the situation he thought he was part of. A customer near the entrance lowered their phone slowly, the expression on their face shifting from curiosity to realization. Chloe felt it fully now, the memory complete, the recognition undeniable, the man. From the screen, the voice from the training, standing right here, having said almost nothing, and yet revealing everything. Malik's gaze remained steady, not searching for reactions, not measuring responses, just present, grounded, as if the reveal was not a moment of triumph, but a moment of correction. The clerk finally found her voice, though it came out quieter than before, stripped of the authority it once carried. I did not know, she said, the sentence fragile, incomplete. Malik's eyes held hers, calm, unwavering. That is the point, he replied. The words simple, but they landed with more weight than anything else that had been said. The room absorbed it. Not just the meaning, but the implication behind it. The fact that none of this required knowledge of who he was, only how he was treated when they believed he was not someone important. The man in the suit stepped slightly to the side, allowing the full line of sight between Malik and the clerk, no longer mediating, no longer directing, just present as the structure around him began to realign. We are initiating an internal review, he said, his tone returning to formal, controlled, but now carrying authority rooted in fact, not assumption. The clerk's shoulders lowered, not in relief, but in realization. The consequences no longer abstract, no longer hypothetical. Chloe took a small step forward again, her voice quieter now, but steady. I told you we should have checked, she said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating what had already become clear. The clerk did not respond, her focus fixed on Malik, on the man she had followed, questioned, and attempted to remove from a space that existed because of him. The irony did not need to be spoken. It lived in the silence between them. Malik shifted slightly for the first time, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just adjusting his stance, as if preparing to close the moment rather than extend it. His phone remained in his hand, but it was no longer a tool, no longer a signal. Everything that needed to move had already moved. Everything that needed to be revealed had already surfaced. He looked around the store once more, not scanning, not evaluating, just seeing it as it was, not as it had been presented to him in this moment, but as something built, something intentional, something that now stood in contrast to the behavior that had unfolded. Inside it, this was never about a coat, he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach those closest, the words settling into the space like a final piece falling into place. The customers, the staff, the guard, even a man in the suit, all of them now part of a moment that had shifted from suspicion to clarity without a single raised voice, without a single forceful act, just truth, steady and undeniable. And in that truth, the entire store stood changed, not in structure, not in design, but in awareness, in understanding, in the realization that what had just happened was not an exception, but a reflection, and that reflection had just been seen clearly for the first time. The silence that followed his words did not feel empty. It felt full, dense with everything that had just been exposed, and for a moment no one dared to interrupt it. Not the clerk, not the guard, not even the man in the suit who now stood slightly behind, allowing the weight of the truth to settle exactly where it needed to. Malik remained at the center of it all, not elevated, not posturing, just present. His calm no longer mistaken for passivity, but recognized for what it had always been. Control, deliberate and unshaken. The clerk's hands, once steady, now hovered uncertainly at her sides, as if she no longer knew where to place them, what role they belonged to. Her voice, when it finally returned, was quieter, stripped of the sharpness it carried before. I was just doing my job, she said, the sentence falling into the space like a defense she hoped might still hold. Malik's eyes stayed on her, not harsh, not forgiving, simply steady. No, he replied, his tone unchanged. You were deciding who deserved your respect. The distinction landed clean, undeniable, and this time, it did not just sit in the air, it moved through the room, reaching the customers, the employees, even the guard who now stood a step farther back than before. The shift in alignment was no longer subtle. It was visible, the narrative had turned, and everyone could feel it. Chloe lowered her gaze briefly, not out of shame, but out of recognition, understanding that what had unfolded was bigger than a single interaction, bigger than a single mistake. It was a pattern, one she had seen hinted at before, but never this clearly. The man in the suit spoke again, his voice measured. "All interactions in this store are subject to review," he said, not directing the statement at anyone in particular, but making sure it reached everyone. The clerk nodded faintly, her earlier certainty replaced by something heavier, the awareness of consequence. Malik shifted his weight slightly. The first movement that suggested the moment was nearing its close, but instead of stepping away, he looked around. The store once more, his gaze passing over the displays, the customers, the staff, not judging, not condemning, but seeing fully the space as it was, not as it was meant to appear. "This brand was built on access," he said, his voice calm but carrying, not assumption. The words settled into the structure of the room itself, challenging the very behavior that had just unfolded within it. A customer near the entrance nodded slowly, almost to themselves, as if the statement had clarified something they had felt but could not name. The clerk swallowed, her voice returning once more, softer now. "I did not mean to disrespect you," she said, the apology incomplete. Not because it lacked sincerity, but because it arrived after the fact. Malik's gaze did not waver. "You did not know me," he said, "and that should have been enough for you to treat me right." The simplicity of it removed every excuse, every justification, leaving only the truth of what had happened. Chloe looked up. Again, her expression no longer uncertain, but resolute. She understood now not just who Malik was, but what he represented in that moment. Not power in the loud sense, not authority in the visible sense, but something quieter, something more lasting, the standard itself. The man in the suit nodded slightly, as if confirming that what needed to be said had been said, that what needed to be seen had been revealed. The guard stepped back another inch, his role in the situation dissolving as the need for it disappeared. The store, once defined by control and presentation, now felt different, not broken, not chaotic, but corrected, the illusion replaced by clarity. Malik lowered his gaze briefly to the coat he had first touched, the one that had started it all, then looked back at the clerk, his voice even, final. "You followed the wrong instinct," he said. A pause, just long enough for the meaning to settle, and the right person. The line landed like a quiet verdict, not shouted, not forced, but absolute. And in that moment the shift was complete. The power dynamic that had once placed him under scrutiny now stood reversed. Not through confrontation, not through force, but through truth, steady and undeniable. And as the room absorbed it, as the weight of it settled into every corner, one thing became clear to everyone present. This was never about removing a man from a store. It was about revealing what happens when respect is given conditionally, and how quickly that condition collapses when faced with reality. The moment did not explode. It unraveled, slowly and visibly, like a thread being pulled from something that once held tight. The clerk stood there, no longer directing anything, no longer controlling the tone or the space. Her authority had not been taken from her. It had dissolved under the weight of her own decisions, and everyone in the room could see it now. The man in the suit stepped forward again, but this time not to interrupt, not to question, but to conclude, his voice steady, formal, carrying the kind of finality that did not need emphasis. "Your access will be reviewed effective immediately," he said, looking directly at the clerk, not harshly, but with clarity. "Pending that review, you are to step away from the floor." The words were not loud, but they landed with unmistakable consequence. The clerk blinked, her posture tightening as if trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "I understand," she said quietly, though the words felt more like acceptance than agreement. The security guard shifted again, now fully stepping back, his role complete without action, his presence no longer required. Chloe exhaled slowly, a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her eyes still on Malik, but now with a different expression, not just recognition, but respect, the kind that comes from witnessing something unfold without force, without volume, just truth moving through a space until everything aligned with it. A customer near the entrance lowered their phone, completely now, no longer recording, just watching, absorbing. Another shook their head slightly, not in disbelief, but in reflection, as if reconsidering something beyond the moment itself. Malik stood exactly where he had been, but the room around him had changed, not physically, but in understanding, in awareness, in the quiet acknowledgement that what had just happened was not isolated, it was representative, and now it had been corrected in real time. The clerk took a small step back, then another, her movement no longer guided by authority, but by instruction, by consequence. She did not look at Malik again immediately, not out of avoidance, but out of recognition that the moment had moved beyond her control. The man in the suit turned slightly toward Malik, his expression respectful, measured. "We will handle this appropriately," he said, not as a promise, but as a statement of process already in motion. Malik nodded once, not as approval, not as dismissal, just acknowledgement. The exchange brief but clear. Chloe stepped forward one last time, her voice soft but steady. "I am sorry this happened," she said, not on behalf of the company, not on behalf of policy, but as herself, as someone who had witnessed it and chosen not to stay silent. Malik looked at her, and for the first time there was a subtle shift in his expression, not a smile, but something close, something that recognized her choice, her willingness to speak when it mattered. "You spoke when it counted," he said quietly. The words simple, but they landed with meaning. Chloe nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. The tension she had carried now replaced with something steadier. The store itself began to breathe again, not all at once, but gradually. Conversations resumed in low tones. Footsteps moved again across the polished floor, but nothing returned to exactly what it had been before, because something had been seen, something had been understood. Malik turned his attention once more to the coat, the same one that had started all. He reached out again, this time lifting it slightly from the rack, examining it. Briefly, not as a customer under watch, but as its creator, its owner, the one who had approved its place there, its design, its presence. He ran his fingers along the fabric, then placed it back exactly where it belonged. The gesture quiet, deliberate, complete. The man in the suit watched without interrupting, without speaking, understanding that the moment was not about control anymore. It was about closure. Malik stepped back slightly, his gaze moving across the store one final time, not searching, not judging, just seeing. And in that final glance, there was no anger, no frustration, just clarity, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be understood. And as he turned to leave, the space did not close behind him the way it had before. It opened, not physically, but in awareness, in standard, in the silent understanding that what had happened here would not be forgotten, not by those who witnessed it, and not by the place itself, because for a brief moment, everything that had been assumed had been exposed, and everything that mattered had been revealed. The door closed behind him with the same quiet precision it had opened, but nothing inside the store felt the same anymore. The air had changed, not heavier, not lighter, just clearer, as if something invisible had been wiped clean and replaced with something harder to ignore. Malik did not rush as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his pace steady, measured, the kind of movement that did not seek attention but carried it anyway. Inside, the store lingered in a silence that was no longer tense, but reflective. Customers moved again, but slower, more aware. Conversations returned, but softer, as if everyone was choosing their words more carefully now. Chloe stood near the counter, her tablet resting loosely in her hands, her eyes still fixed on the door even after it had closed, replaying the moment not as a scene, but as a lesson, something she would not forget. Not because of who Malik was, but because of what had been revealed when no one knew who he was. The clerk had stepped fully away from the floor now, standing near the back, her posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive, just still, processing, the certainty she once held replaced by something quieter, something more difficult to face, the understanding that the mistake was not in what she did after she knew, but in what she chose before she did. The man in the suit remained for a moment longer, speaking in low tones with another manager who had arrived, their words not audible, but their expressions clear. This was not being dismissed, not being minimized. It was being recorded, reviewed, addressed, the structure of the company responding not to protect itself, but to correct itself. And that distinction mattered. Outside, Malik paused briefly at the edge of the sidewalk, not to look back, but to take in the city around him, the movement, the noise, the rhythm of a place that rarely stopped to examine itself. His reflection caught faintly in the glass of the store behind him. not as a figure of power, not as a title, but as a man who had walked into a space built by his own vision and been treated like he did not belong, and still chose not to raise his voice, not to force his position, but to let the truth arrive on its own terms. That was the difference, that was the standard. Inside, Chloe finally looked down at her tablet, then back up again, her voice quiet but certain as she spoke to a co-worker beside her. It was never about the coat, she said, echoing the words she had heard, but now fully understanding them. The co-worker nodded slowly, not just agreeing, but realizing the moment had shifted something in them too, and how they would see the next person who walked through those doors, how they would choose to respond before assumption could take hold. The clerk remained still, her gaze lowered, not out of shame alone, but out of recognition, the kind that stays with you long after the moment passes, the kind that changes how you act the next time you're given the same choice, because there would be a next time, there always was, and that was where the real difference would be made, not in this moment, but in the ones that followed it. Malik adjusted his stance slightly, then continued walking, blending back into the flow of the street. No announcement, no spectacle, just presence, the same presence he had carried into the store, the same presence that had revealed everything without demanding anything. And as he moved forward, the message remained behind, not written on walls, not posted in policy, but carried in the minds of those who had witnessed it, a quiet, unshakable truth that respect is not something you give based on recognition. It is something you show before you have it, because the moment you decide someone does not belong, you reveal more about yourself than you ever will about them. And in that realization, the entire space, the entire system shifts, not because it was forced to, but because it finally saw itself clearly. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you know better, you are expected to do better, not louder, not later, but immediately, in the next moment, with the next person, before the same mistake has a chance to repeat itself again.